Hi, everybody. I'm Hiro Yoshikawa, a professor of education here and the academic dean at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and welcome to this truly special Askwith Forum tonight. We're very delighted to be able to welcome Joel Klein here tonight. I think to some extent he doesn't need any introduction as one of the leaders of educational reform in the past decades in the United States. But I am going to give him a little introduction. He has a long track record of public service. After graduating from Columbia University and the law school nearby here, what's it called? Harvard Law School. Klein served in the White House counsel's office under Bill Clinton, also as U.S. Assistant Attorney General in the Antitrust Division, where he was the lead prosecutor in the historic antitrust case, U.S. versus Microsoft. Was appointed by Mayor Bloomberg in 2002 to be New York City Schools Chancellor, where, as many of you know, he oversaw the nation's largest school system, over 1 million kids, 136,000 employees, and a $23 billion budget. And beyond that, pursued numerous important reforms, including centralizing control of the system within the New York City Department of Education, developing a uniform citywide curriculum, pushing for charter school innovations, smaller schools, teacher performance bonuses, and really integrating data and higher quality data into evaluation. Merrill Tisch, who's the chancellor of the State Board of Regents, said that Joel will go down as one of the great urban educational reformers of this century. So, and in no small part, his legacy lives on in terms of his deputies, many of whom have gone on to achieve landmark work, such as Andres Alonso, superintendent in Baltimore, Garth Harries, assistant superintendent in New Haven, Connecticut. We have former folks that he's mentored in our EDLD program, probably several of whom are here tonight. So much further and wider impact in many other districts than New York City. He resigned as chancellor in 2010 to join News Corporation, where he's now CEO of Amplify, which is dedicated to reimagining K-12 education by creating new digital products and services, something that's of high interest to us here as we get edX off the ground. So please join me in welcoming Joel Klein. He's going to handle his own questions after his talk, and then after his talk, if folks who want to ask questions can line up, there's a mic here and there's a mic there. Thanks very much.
You're not lining up already for questions, are you? Thank you very much, Dean. I appreciate that. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled that so many people from New York are part of your leadership program. I've had the privilege to mentor people from the Harvard School of Graduate Education, and I really want to salute the work that you do. I must confess I was a little taken aback when I heard this lecture, which I'm thrilled to have been selected to give. Really is an hour-and-a-half experience, and it put me in mind of a story that was told by somebody from my prior life when I was a Supreme Court law clerk. Justice William Douglas was then on the court. This will age me some. And Justice Douglas always told a story about his grandfather, who was an itinerant minister. And he used to go town on Sunday mornings where they didn't have any formal services, so that people once every year or so could actually have a formal church service. And on this one day, he showed up in northern Oklahoma, and it was a cold, snowy day, and they were supposed to meet at the town square at about 10:30 to start the service, and 11 o'clock, 11:30, and only one guy showed up. And so the minister was, he traveled all the way from Washington State to Oklahoma. He was a little disappointed, and so he jumped off the stage, and he goes up to the guy and says, "Look, I guess there's only one of you. It's a cold day, it's snowy, there's no purpose. Why don't we go home?" So the guy says, "Well, Reverend," he says, "I'm just a lowly cowpoke," he says, "so take it for what it's worth. But on a cold night, when it's snowing and I ride out to the range, if I only find one cow, I say, I feed that critter. I don't turn around and go home on him." So the Reverend was quite inspired by this. He gets back up on the stage, and he starts to go prayer after prayer and psalm after psalm, song after song, going on now, sermon after sermon. Hour and a half, 2 hours go by. He's really about to almost expire. He jumps off the stage. He runs up to the guy and says, "Gee, that was so exhilarating. Thank you for that. Wasn't it terrific?" The guy said, "Well, Reverend, like I told you, I'm just a lowly cowpoke," he said. "And on a Friday night when I go out to the range, if I find only one cow, I don't try to feed him the food for the whole herd." So I thought about that tonight. Just want you to know, though, tonight, Adelaide Stevenson put this best. It's my job to speak and your job to listen. If you get finished with your work before I finish mine, you feel free to get up and leave, okay? Because hour and a half is a long time on any night of the week. But I am thrilled to be here. And I think it's an important time, and I hope we can open up a really important discussion and debate. I think the discussion in K-12 education is becoming increasingly polarized, and in some respects we're fighting over issues that I don't think are really going to move the ball forward. And I think we need to think about, if you will, a new way, third way forward that enables us to accomplish what I think all of us want to accomplish, is a much improved school system. You know, if you look through the prism of the recent Chicago strike, what struck me about it, no pun intended, but what struck me about it is something as rare as a teacher strike, something that doesn't happen often. A Democratic mayor against a traditional Democratic constituency, a teachers union, during an election year, with all sorts of noise, but most people didn't understand what the key issues were, why they were so important. And I don't even think the parties to the discussion really understood. I mean, surely people don't go on strike over an issue like whether we count 30% or 40% of your evaluation based on value add, on standardized tests. And yet, so much noise surrounded that debate. And I've asked lots of people, what do you think, who won, who lost? And most people look at you like they don't know what you're talking about. And that, I fear, has become emblematic of the discussion and the debate that we are now having. So I'd like to sit back tonight in a sort of Italo Calvino way and say, let's just take a deep breath and think together here at the Harvard School of Graduate Education about, is there a win-win way forward that will actually have the transformative effect that our kids need? And I'd like to talk to you today based on three dimensions, I hope. Candor in assessing where we are, a real sense of vision for a future we could be proud of, and the role, the transformative role of innovation in that respect. Now, I want to start with this quote, which is pretty much to me what I think frames why this is important. It's an H.G. Wells quote that human history is a race between education and catastrophe. It's slightly hyperbolic, but terribly important. And I think that is the race this country faces. If you've read by a couple of Harvard economists, Claudia Golden and Lawrence Katz, they talked about a different race, but it's a similar race, the race between education and technology. And whether it's between education and technology or education and catastrophe, we are losing that race. And the kind of people we aspire to be, the kind of nation we are, depends on us not losing that race. And why I think that's so important, if you think about what Golden and Katz have written about, you know, the world is not going to stay put while we try to figure this out. Two things have dramatically changed. One, the skills necessary and demanded in market economies throughout the world are entirely different. When I started public school in New York City in 1950, over 60% of our workforce were high school dropouts. Today that number is 6 and declining. Even in this economy, people with skills are finding lots of job opportunities. Look at the STEM sector. But people without skills are going to be more and more left behind. And worse, the divide, the income divide between those who are skilled and those who aren't is becoming more and more dramatic. And second of all, we're facing global competition at a level we've never faced. So right now, to be candid, if we look at our system, let's think about the kind of results we're seeing. Right now, about 35% of our kids, 38% of our kids are proficient on the national, the NAEP test, right? So that means just under 40%. If you think about our high school graduation rate, it's a little above 70%. So that means right there, more than a quarter of our kids are clearly not being exited the school system with the skills they need. What's their future going to be like? And of the 3/4 or the 73% that are graduating, at least half, and if you read from the College Board and from some of the work that ACT are doing, if you read those studies, you're talking about maybe only 1/4 are college ready. I mean, we're playing a game. We're giving a kid a diploma that Arnie Duncan, our Secretary of Education's word, we're lying to kids. But if those are the kind of results we're getting, and then we look at where are we in the global situation, we see we're in the middle at best or toward the bottom in virtually every single global measure that's out there. If you look at graduation rates, our high school and our college graduation rates used to be number 1 on the globe. Today, college is in the middle and high school is toward the bottom. If you look at the World Economic Forum, they found us on science, technology, education, and math. We're 48th in the world. This is just not a winning formula. And perhaps, to me, the most troubling quote of all is this one. For the first time in history, America's younger generation is less well-educated than its parents. And the part after the ellipsis, think about that, less well-educated than our parents. Our demographic between 55 and 64 is a better educated demographic than between 25 and 34. And the result is that more and more Americans believe that their kids' lives will be less well off than their own lives. There is an enormous correlation between education and ultimate economic performance. And what's troubling to me is so many people continue to think that somehow this is a problem of resources. As former chancellor of New York, I supported in every way I can and will continue to make sure we prioritize education and spend more on it. But the facts are pretty gruesome. If you look at this is 1970, and this goes up here. And you look at basically 2.5 times in inflation-adjusted dollars are what we're spending on education. This is 17-year-old NAEP scores on math and on reading. So we made this investment. What did this 2.5 times go for? Largely, it went to increase the number of teachers. We have 3/4 more teachers in the system and other adults, plus increase in teacher salaries. So it's not just a question of resources. It's really a question of the way we do business. And so for me, I wanted to understand, why is it? Why do we look at this kind of situation? I mean, after all, in 1983, we had a report that we all read called The Nation at Risk. Since then, we've heard more about school reform and education governors and education mayors and education presidents, and yet this is still basically what we're looking at. I remember early on as chancellor, I read an article by a professor at Duke that struck me as just about right. We talked about so much reform, but so little change. And in the end, the most important quote, and this is one of a couple of things that I really hope I get you to focus on tonight. To me, the most important piece that I've read on this is actually, from all people, Albert Shanker, the iconic union leader. Now remember, this is not some capitalist, this is not some guy who's some entrepreneur. This is the leading American teachers union leader. And he says it's time to admit that public education operates like a planned economy, a bureaucratic system in which everybody's role is spelled out in advance, and there are few incentives for innovation and productivity. Few incentives for innovation and productivity. It's no surprise then that our school system doesn't improve. It more resembles the communist economy than our own market economy. And I think we've got to be honest and get our head around that. Fundamentally, the things that drive the successful parts of this country tend to be driven on innovation, productivity. The Googles, the Facebooks, the Apples, those are American companies doing transformative work. But in K-12, we don't see that. We have a very buttoned down, not properly incentivized system. So tonight, I'd like to talk about what I think are key, big restructuring ideas to see if we can imagine the kind of world that Shanker was talking about, one in which the school system was incentivized by innovation and productivity, and actually view this through the prism of win-win, not just the kids versus the teachers, but really victories for the children that empower and enhance the teachers and enhance the profession and make people prouder to be a part of the enterprise. And in that respect, there'll be a little bit of back to the future as well as imagining a future. But I think both of those are relevant to what we're discussing tonight. And I'm going to talk about 3 core concepts that I think need to drive a vision that I hope you'll embrace. One is choice and competition, which I think will create the dynamism the system needs. Second is to truly professionalize teaching so that teachers become like lawyers and doctors, a true profession. They become the senseis from Japan that make and drive that system. They become that group that we talk so much about in Finland and elsewhere. And then the third thing is to use technology, never to replace teachers, but to empower teachers and engage students in every other aspect of our lives. We've seen a technological transformation of unprecedented, unimagined proportion. And yet in K-12, we still use the models that we've used for the past 100 years. Surely we can think much more creatively and more effectively on how we teach and how our kids learn. Now let me make clear, in focusing on those 3 things, those are systems changes. They won't be easy, but they're critically important. And it doesn't mean that I don't think, because I do think curriculum matters, standards matters. I'm a big fan of the Common Core, even though not everybody is enamored with them. I do think that time matters. I think resilience in Paul Tufts' new book, I think those things matter. In fact, if you haven't read it, take a look at Robert Pondisco. Just came out on Atlantic Monthly's website with a piece called, quote, How Self-Expression Damaged My Students, going to the whole curriculum and standards set of issues. But regardless of those other things, if we don't get these structural issues, the issues that Al Shanker candidly talked about when he talked about here, a school system that more resembles a communist economy than our own market economy, then these other things may work in a particular school or in a few schools, but we won't take to scale what we need to transform the education system. Now, one piece of good news is, before I address those 3 areas, I want to say I think we're at a propitious time, because I think these factors are beginning to impact in a way that can facilitate change. So people ask me, well, why are you optimistic? These are big changes. I think there are influences that are going to begin to affect us, and all of that I think is for the good. The economics of our business have changed. I showed you that graph where it went up 2.5 times in real dollars since '70. It's not going to continue that way. We're going to have to think about and think wisely about our resources. We can't continue to simply hope that our ship will come in and we can throw more money at it. Second of all, the Common Core, if done right, will do 2 things, I think. One, point out that we don't have an honest 73% or 74% graduation rate. We have a much lower one, and we need to get serious. And when we disaggregate those numbers based on minority and poverty, I hope that they become a real wake-up call for the country. Third of all, we're going to see a whole transformation in our teaching force. All the numbers show that we're going to be losing lots and lots of teachers in the next decade, and we're going to have to replace them with a new generation of millennials that I think will be much, much more accommodating to a new and different vision of the system. And then I think the economics of computing and tablets and all of that gives us the kind of platforms and opportunities that we will need. So, and here's, even if you look at the change in the teaching force, you begin to see we're going to have just many more young new teachers coming into the system and far fewer senior teachers. So now let's disaggregate this and look at it one at a time. Let me start with choice and competition. I just was privileged to chair with 30 different people a committee or a task force for the Council on Foreign Relations called U.S. Education Reform and National Security, and I did this with Condoleezza Rice. That committee concluded almost unanimously, given there's 30 people involved from lots of different perspectives, that enhanced choice and competition in an environment of equitable resource allocation will fuel the innovation necessary to transform results. Now, I want to make 2 points about this. This doesn't mean that every charter school or every new school is going to be a good school. What it means is that as a mechanism for transformation, choice, and competition. Those things are what Al Shanker was talking about. They drive change. And instead, what we have, think about the difference between the post-secondary world in America and the K-12 world. Whatever challenges you face in college and university today, people from all over the world come to America to study our colleges and universities. And while they're facing challenges, our state universities were the greatest state university systems in the world. No one comes to see us on K-12. Why is that? I believe in part that's because K-12 is organized the way Shanker said it. It's a government-run monopoly with very few incentives to increase productivity or, more importantly, to truly innovate. Whereas the post-secondary world has always been a world that's a competitive world in which people had to earn their student bodies, keep their student bodies. Second point I want to make is a deep equity point. It's one I feel strongly about as a former schools chancellor as well as a parent. And that is, every one of us would insist on choice for our kids. There's no one in this room who would say, I'd be happy to let my kid go to every single school in the Boston public school system or the New York public school system, right? People nod their heads when I say this. But think about the profundity of that recognition. I used to ask people all the time, whose kids should go to the 75, 80, or some people, 90% of the schools you wouldn't send your own kids to? And you say, well, those are for other people's children. But you know, other people's children are the kids who start out with the least advantages in life and the greatest challenges. They can't move to a new neighborhood or a new community or send their kids to private school. For them, it's truly one and done. So to me, both in terms of creating a marketplace that will be innovative and dynamic, and in terms of any sense of equity, the idea that the most privileged kids in America have choice, but those with the least advantages are told it's one and done, and somehow will wave a wand over the school to make it better. It seems to me to be terribly, terribly wrong. The other thing I think that's important, and evidence matters here, because this is a back to the future, I think there are 3 examples right now of really powerful choice in various communities that have shown that there are real results. And again, it's not about charter versus public. It's about choice and about good schools and schools earning the student body that attends to them. 2 of these are from New York. The other is a natural experiment that occurred in New Orleans after Katrina, and I want to just walk through them quickly. In New York City under Bloomberg, we set out to do something that nobody else has tried to do. We shut down 60 big high schools, most of which were failing miserably and all of which were failing significantly. And that's almost 40% of our high school system. We replaced them in a community-driven, bottom-up, teacher-driven, principal-driven school system where people partnered in the community came to us with over 300 new small schools. And when you're talking over 30,000 kids each year going to high school. That's larger than virtually any other urban area except 1 or 2 in the country. And we did it over the course of 10 years. And again, all of this was a public school choice system, and every kid had a choice. He could apply 1 through 12. It wasn't easy, but it was up to the kid. So if you want to go to school next door to you, fine. If you wanted to go to school in the other borough, fine. We went through this process. Then MDRC, a highly respected research organization, has done 2 years of research, and the results are dramatic. And I don't want to say that the schools are where they need to be, but I do want you to look at these results. This was a double-blind study. Every kid in this study applied to the new small schools. Half of them got in, half of them didn't get in because there was no room. They were oversubscribed. So right then and there, you know, people voting with their feet. When you look at the difference in graduation rates, you're talking about 9 points here. We're talking some 25, 30,000 kids that they measured here. And the big difference came in regions and advanced regions, which are the more important. In other words, the easiest diploma was pretty much the same. That's a dramatic set of differences. And if you take it at the next level and you look at different cohorts, kids who started at level 1, the lowest level, you're talking about almost 9-point or 8-point difference there. At the higher levels, you're talking about if we had a kid at level 3 in these schools, it meant the kid was basically on grade, you're talking about huge differences in ultimate performance. Let's look at African American males. You're talking about 10-point difference. Now again, not every one of those kids was college ready. We need to raise standards. But these are dramatic, and it's not across a small sample. And how do I know it's apples to apples? It's because the same kids applied to this school, and then one of them got in, and the next had to go down their list of schools that they got into. By definition, the school they got into was better than the school we were closing down and phasing out. And every one of those schools, built with the support from the community, people like New Visions, Urban Assembly, the Asia Society, the College Board, all of them in an all hands on deck. I let them decide the schools. I let them decide what teaching ratios they wanted. I let them choose the principals of the schools. And what we did is hold them accountable. And now, 2 years into this, and MDRC will have another year next year, and I predict the results will continue, if anything, get better. The second example is one I'm very proud of because we set out consciously like this one to do it. We decided to grow charter schools, not again because we run into public schools. We didn't have any ideological preference. We wanted to bring choice, new entrants into the market, create dynamism. There's been a lot written about Margaret Raymond's national study on how charter schools did. New York opened over 150 charter schools under Mayor Bloomberg. And while nationally, Margaret Raymond didn't find any results, she's a Stanford professor, in New York, applying the same exact methodology, she did find results, as did Carolyn Hawksby. On several of our schools, Roland Fryer here at the Department of Economics found remarkable results. But the one I want to focus you on now is Harlem. Because Harlem, working with Jeff Canada and other people, we set out to flood the zone and create a true choice district in Harlem. We put in somewhere between 25 and 30 charter schools, to the point right now where kids starting kindergarten in Harlem, is about a 50-50 chance you'll go to a charter or a public school. And over the past several years, we've watched the performance of these schools. Now, let me give you some data that hasn't even been published yet, but Eva Moskowitz, who runs Success Academy, is about to publish these data that are based on the most recent test scores. And they compare third grade kids in 2006, when the test first began, and in 2012, last year. And the differences are so dramatic and so powerful. And why this is important is because what it does is it looks at Harlem, which covers several parts of our school district structure. We have 32 districts. And it says if Harlem, which is District 3, parts of 3, 4, and 5, if you aggregated that and looked at it as one of the 32, in 2006, when it was predominantly, almost exclusively, all traditional public schools, that school district would have been number 28 in math and 26 in English. So out of 32, it would have been 28 and 26. Today, 6 years later, those same schools, combining charter and public, all the schools that are in that geographic territory, went from 28th to 16th in math and 26th to 18th in English. So what you're talking is same tests, same kids eclipsing in math, almost 2 districts a year they move past, and in English, a district plus a year. Now that can't be that people were creaming people or not creaming people, because it's the same geographic area in the lower grades. And the charter schools themselves, if they were a district, which are about a third of the kids, would have been 4th in math, 5th in English. But the public schools, so this notion that the charter is creamed is proven wrong, because the public schools went up themselves from 28 to 22 in math, 26 to 24 in English. So all in, what you saw is one of the most robust competitive models actually producing dramatic improvement, not just in one sector, but across the sectors. And the third one is the natural experiment. The tragedy of Katrina meant we had to start all over. And they started all over in a very different way in New Orleans. And there's just a new report that came out literally this month it's by Third Way, and it's called Born on the Bayou, a New Model for American Education. And post-Katrina, what happened, through the good work of a lot of people, is lots of charters went down there and they created new models and new opportunities, and they gave everyone in the school district choice, 100% choice in New Orleans. And right now, about 75 to 80% of those schools our charter schools. And New Orleans, pre-Katrina, was one of the worst performing school districts in the world. Now let's look at just two quick charts. 2007, when they started, this 23 would have gone back and back and back. These are the recovery schools that are basically the New Orleans school district. This is the state of Louisiana. State of Louisiana has gone up 8 points. This has gone up somewhere around 28 points. This is dramatic. If these paths continue, you could see something in 4 or 5 years in Louisiana which you can't see anyplace else in America, and that is that the kids in a high poverty, highly challenged urban area outperforming the rest of the state. And by the same token, look at these numbers. 2005, this one goes to 2011. But here you take African Americans, which are the predominant segment of students in New Orleans, and those African Americans were 8 points behind the rest of the state African Americans, and now they're 2 points ahead. And all that growth came post-Katrina. So these are 3 examples. One in New York at the high school level, pure 100%, 300 new high schools, all public, traditional public, 2 charter schools. So I think this is one precondition toward creating a new and effective and different system. The second point I want to focus on is transforming the teaching profession. Now look, we are now at a point where teachers are feeling bashed and other people feel the system isn't working. We have got to create a teaching profession that is a highly respected profession. But that's not going to come about with rhetoric. That's going to come about with transforming the system. One of the things that I read every couple of years, because I think it's so brilliantly inspirational, is Al Shanker's speech in 1985 called The Making of a Profession, which is reprinted in The American Educator. And there, Shanker talks about, literally, a second revolution in which he says, I'm convinced that unless we go beyond collective bargaining to the achievement of true teacher professionalism, we will fail in our major objectives to preserve public education in the United States and to improve the status of teachers economically, socially, and politically. And he says we need the kind of revolution that he himself fostered in New York with creating real rights and collective bargaining. But a trade union model is not going to do the job. And so a student of many of the great, and we hear a lot now about, particularly about Finland, and everybody would love to have the kind of system. But Finland started in the 70s and 80s to professionalize. See, it is harder to get into a graduate school of teaching there than it is to get into virtually any other graduate school. They have a system in which, as you're being mentored, if you don't perform, people are counseled out of the profession. And they believe they have a professional responsibility to enhance standards, demand more of the system, and so forth. And that's something you just can't create by articulating a view. You have to do it by transforming a profession, and that's going to take tremendous hard work. What Amanda Ripley, who's written a lot for Time magazine and put this in the Wall Street Journal, who studied this school system, she said something I think that ought to help us detoxify the debate. Every country in the developed world has a teachers' union, so the presence of a union doesn't determine the quality of a country's schools. There is, however, a significant relationship between the professionalism of the union and the health of an education system. The professionalism of a union. The all-important issue is not how easy it is to fire the worst teachers. It is how to elevate the entire craft without going to war to teachers, with teachers. And that's such an important notion. And again, I think if you think about this, that's going to take a really different lens. I mean, we almost need, beginning with a Flexner report for the way we educate teachers, the people we attract into the profession, and then how we make that really a truly learned profession so that America's best and brightest, they won't go there because it'll be the highest paid profession, but people might go there because it'll be the most respected profession and a profession that can help transform our country. If you think about what Shanker talks about in this article, he actually proposed a national test like a bar exam or a medical exam where you can't practice unless you pass this. And it had 3 components. Think about what it is compared to today. 1, a rigorous component on content knowledge. And I have to say, too many teachers in our schools are just not at the level of content knowledge. And Shanker, and I'll come back to this, himself commented on it. Second thing would be on pedagogical knowledge, on the application of knowledge to the teaching environment. Because you can be a brilliant mathematician, that doesn't make you a brilliant math teacher. That even happens up here at Harvard sometimes. But people always laugh at that. So you have somebody in mind, I don't. I was just making a generic point. And then the third thing, on top of this two-part test, if you pass those, the third thing he talked about was in order to do this, you had to be mentored for at least a year, maybe 2 years, and that your mentor basically had to sign off on you. That would be the beginnings of a prerequisite of a model. Second thing that he talked about was a professional board with real peer review and real accountability and an ability to say, these are people who on an ongoing basis shouldn't be in the profession. We need to elevate standards. We've got to become part of the vanguard for reform, not a counter force, but at the cutting edge. He talked about merit-based career ladders where people were paid for knowledge, not for time in a course. I mean, what he calls seat time. Right now, if you take a course in New York, or this came about in Chicago, you just take a course, you get paid more. Why should we pay you more? We should pay you more if you have more demonstrated knowledge, more demonstrated skill, absolutely. And Shanker talked about paying for performance, for results, for outcomes. We can argue about how to measure that, but he wanted to incentivize excellence in the system. So his view was one that we've got to take this second revolution, and I fear that that is something that is, because of the polarization of debate, is becoming harder and harder, but it is more and more essential. If we don't create, think about this, people go to the Harvard Law School, they practice law. People go to Harvard Medical School, they practice medicine. People go to education schools, in the first 5 years, a third to a half of them exit the profession. There's something wrong with that model. Nobody thinks a third to a half of our doctors or our lawyers exit the profession. Whatever issues we face in the law and medicine, they're respected, learned professions. If we don't create that, and if the unions don't move themselves from a trade union model to a professional model, then I think other changes, whatever we accomplish, are going to be significantly undermined. Now, the third piece is a technology piece, and one that I'm personally now heavily involved with, because I think, again, there's enormous upside. It has two dimensions: customization. How many times I walked in a classroom when I saw a teacher trying to teach kids, some were 2 years behind, some were on grade, and some were a year ahead. What are the odds? So she tried to teach to the middle of the class and maybe spill over a little. But you know, technology can enable us to do things in an entirely different and customized way, and I'll show you some stuff on that. Second thing we can do is think about the teaching and learning experience, both the way we do it. I mean, think about the revolution by himself that Sal Khan is precipitating. We can think about the idea that every kid can have a tablet now and can actually watch videos, play games that are educationally driven, work on curriculum. We can extend the day, extend the year without extending the school day in a conventional way. We can deliver content. We can empower teachers. There's so many things, and we're just at the beginning of this. But if you think about it, there's so many opportunities. You know, just this week I was reading, U.S. News did a STEM conference, and they wrote a report on it. And just think about this. This makes so much sense. We know in K-12 teachers are crucial, but mining many thousands in the next few years in STEM he's talking about won't happen. Technology is likely the missing ingredient based on evidence that there are better ways to learn. Getting the good teachers to amplify their skills is the only solution. You can't mass produce enough of them to meet the need. So right here, we're thinking about ways to deal with reality and amplify the great teachers, which I think is the way to go. Randy Weingarten, the AFT, just came out with an innovation I think is brilliant, this share my lesson thing. So you create a crowdsourced website in which people can go on and learn from each other. Why should each teacher, I used to watch these young kids sometimes, and 1 o'clock in the morning trying to do a lesson plan after they had to grade this and do, why shouldn't they get the benefit from their colleagues thinking? How long are we going to keep the role of the teacher hermetically sealed? Why don't we open up the information? I was just reading about somebody who licensed their lessons and made over $1 million. It's a lot of money. But look, if other people want to buy licensed lessons, God bless them, in order to improve the craft. And these are the kind of things that I think we can see real changes. And that's what we're doing right now at Amplify. And we're doing it in several different ways. This is our thing. We're trying to reimagine K-12 education, digital products and service, empower teachers, students, and parents in a new way. It's a three-part play, and I want you to get your head around all three of these. The first is what we call Amplify Insight. These are analytics, and I'm going to demo this for you in a second. But basically, this is how we customize. This is how we know our students. We've got products now. For a kid who's a struggling reader, we can tell you whether the problem is phonics, we can tell you whether it's vocabulary, whether it's comprehension, and we can help teachers to group kids so that they can work together. Again, for one teacher to try to figure out, even with 20 or 22 kids, how to do this when there's so many ways we can enable them and empower them. Second thing we're working on is a thing we call Amplify Learning, and we're creating an active, digitized, gamified curriculum. A curriculum that will never replace teachers, but will empower teachers. And if teachers don't embrace it, it won't work. And why am I optimistic about it? Because we've worked with teachers and kids to develop it. This little guy here, he's your curioso for middle school kids. And this whole guy's life surrounds the work you do. How many books you have in your library, how you decorate your library. Every kid gets a virtual office in this world. And whether this guy can help you in the world of games depends upon whether this guy who's trying to destroy you is able to disempower rather than empower him. But kids take to this in a very different way. It's personalized, it's immersive, it's gamified, and it's exciting. And then the third thing is just a tablet-based, basically taking the tablet notion but optimizing it and customizing it for education, one driven by analytics and content that is, again, the teacher can drive to a kid. These three together, and this is one way to view the world. Lots of people will look at it differently. But these three things are what we call a tripod of Amplify. We need to build it on Insight, give everybody access. So in our tablet, we've got AT&T as a partner so that kids in high-needs communities that don't have Wi-Fi at home will have 4G in their tablet. And then change the teaching and learning experience so that teachers can come in behind this to optimize what they do. Those are the things that we're doing now. Let me see if I can figure out. I want to just give you a demo of one of them if I can call it up. All right, so this is just an instantiation of a tablet that we're working on for kids. It's got all sorts of, apps and so forth. But the thing I wanted to show you was a prerequisite to that is our learning map. Now take a look at this. This is basically a map of Common Core standards in 6th grade, and all with soft assessment. Very reliable. We've done this so many thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of kids. So this is the skills. They show a teacher what other skills they relate to, the right sequencing, what they touch on. Now, if a kid is blocked here, this is just at the pre-algebra stage. If he's blocked here, he's going to get lost here. And if he gets lost here, you take him over to algebra. It's not going to work. If a teacher doesn't know this, it may be true about Joel, but not true about Juan. So while we're trying to figure this out for Joel, we don't want to hold Juan back, who maybe needs to be here. So this gives you the insight and the knowledge, and we're doing this across all the subject matters. And then what you see, and here's where the power starts to come in. All right, so this is a fractions thing, and what we're saying is this is standard 5FB, and for this kid clicks on his own map. This has got his assignments and his standards, and here, what do you find? You find about this standard. So now the teacher's saying you can do this in individual or group, but she can drive reading material to him, she can drive practice, games, video lessons, tutoring. She customizes this. Again, nobody trying to replace the teacher here. But when you do that, while Joel is working on these fractions, somebody else can be working on decimals, somebody could be advanced working on algebra, and you can move your class in a highly customized way. You click on here, you can bring up a few videos that the kid can watch. This is the kind of thing that I think holds out enormous, enormous promise. Last thing I want you to do is show you a quick movie of a platform that we're trying to create that we think can extend the day and the year, organize the way teachers do business, and really impact the way kids learn. I'll show you that quickly.
From the moment you turn it on, the Amplify tablet knows who you are, what you're studying, what homework you have, and even when it's due. We've organized all your apps and content by course, so when you walk into science class, you have everything you need right at your fingertips. We've included a channel full of reference materials with rich, trusted content. There's also a bookshelf, like a library curated for you. It knows your reading level and your interests, and it has recommendations from your teachers and friends. And there's a channel full of great video content that's relevant to whatever you're studying. For each of your courses, it's got just the right combination of background material and interactive games, simulations that can help bring content to life, video, and of course, textbooks. These aren't last year's textbooks in digital form. They're engaging and interactive. You can highlight sections, look up definitions, and make notes right in the book. We're working on all new content designed especially for learning on a tablet. It'll have virtual worlds to motivate you, animation and game dynamics to engage you in rigorous material, and sophisticated analytics that tailor the learning experience to you. And that's just a sneak peek of what the Amplify tablet has in store for the future. You don't just see your homework assignments, you complete them here too. With the Amplify tablet, your teacher or a tutor can give you real-time, instant feedback while you're writing your essay for literature, say. He or she can comment on your work by asking you just the right questions at just the right moment, in time for you to revise and improve it. And that's the most effective way to learn. You can also take part in group projects with your classmates or peers around the globe. You can use social media for learning. There's even an online tutor to give you extra help when you ask for it. It shows you a map of every math skill and concept you need to graduate high school, so you can see where you are now, where you need to go, and the gap between them. We know that if your learning can focus on those gaps, you're more likely to succeed. So the Amplify tablet lines up specific recommendations, books, videos, apps, and games, targeted at those gaps. The tablet's algorithms give teachers the ability to group kids quickly according to their progress. And of course, you can make adjustments based on what you know will work best in the real world. We've created a way to focus students' attention and share resources or student work with the whole class.
Heads up, guys. One thing you're not getting is how starch turns to glucose.
Parents can get access to how their child is doing on his homework, his grades, and about his progress over the course of the year towards the things he's expected to learn. And parents can get recommendations directly from their child's teacher on what books and apps they can buy to help through a web browser, smartphone, companion tablet, or even your TV.
I'm thrilled to say we've begun to reinvent school. And the best part is, we're just at the beginning.
So thank you. So let me wrap it up and let me end on this note, and then let's have some questions and discussion. But this is a Harvard School of Graduate Education. Where else is a better place to reimagine education, to have big thoughts about the transformative power of three ideas that really in the end must appeal to people? One, meaningful choice in a system. Two, a real professionalization of teaching in America. And third, using technology to do two simple things: empower great teachers and make them better, and engage kids in ways that make the learning experience richer, more customized, and more exciting. I think we can do this. I actually think it is a new way forward, rather than continue to have the old tired fights we've had. You've been an enormously attentive and kind audience. I appreciate that. Anyone who has questions, line up at these two mics, and we'll take your questions, your comments, and any thoughts you might have. Thank you again. Thank you.
Hi, Joel. Thank you, Mr. Klein.
My name is Joel. Thank you. Tell me your name. And
I'm Jackie.
Jackie.
I work for a firm called the Parthenon Group. We do some consulting. We've worked with New York City Public Schools. I just wanted to ask, I know 900 districts right now are working on their Race to the Top applications around personalized learning. I just thought I'd ask you what you want to see come out of this application across the districts, what kind of reforms you're hoping to see, if Amplify is working with any districts on this, or what your stake is on in
No,
this
we are working,
process.
like Parthenon, we're working with several districts. What I hope to come out of it is this kind of thing. I want to see people try, Salcon has got this view of flipping the classroom. Let's try, we don't know the answers. I mean, what we need to do is think about, are there ways to improve the way we're doing the work? So I'd like to see different models, different instantiation. I'm so worried about, if we think great teachers are the core to effective transformation, I worry enormously about rural areas, and especially high poverty rural areas where it's hard to get great human capital. So let's see if there are ways through remote mechanisms to bring in those kinds of things. And that's what I hope comes out of it. I give Arnie and Department of Education enormous credit because I think they're not afraid of innovation. Jim Shelton, who worked with me in New York, has been driving that forum, and he deserves, in my view, a lot of credit. But I also hope when I look at those 900 applications that I see a whole bunch that I hadn't even thought about, because that's what innovation is really all about. I was with a bunch of guys last night. The average age was about 24 years old, and they all have these websites. One guy went from 4 to 14 in the last 6 months, and it was just pulsating to be with him. And I just wish we'd get that in K to 12.
Thank you, Joel, for this presentation. I'm really excited by the innovations that you've shown here. My name is Amy. I teach industrial design at the graduate and undergraduate levels at Rhode Island School of Design. And I am really interested in hearing your ideas about object-based learning and also integrating arts with academics, and if this plan is incorporating any of that at this point.
Absolutely. What was the first? What kind of learning you said?
Integrating object-based learning.
What do you mean by object-based learning?
Integrating arts with STEM, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and math.
So they call that STEAM.
Right.
Exactly. So yeah, no, look, this is all, if you saw the world we're creating in our curriculum, it's a world that's highly visual and that will incorporate the arts and incorporate all of the things that are part of a complete education. Instead of, one of the things that I think is going to start to break down is this notion that there's simply, a math class. One of the best teachers in New York City I had ever seen was a teacher who taught math through the use of music. And it just lit the place up. And again, these are things that are easily incorporated. I also think the amount of social networking we can do so that kids will actually be working together on these challenges and things that we're building into curriculum. It's one thing to learn math, it's another thing to build a bridge. We should be able to teach kids to do both.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm really interested in educational technology. I'm working with San Diego State University with their ed tech department. And I was wondering, one of the things I really loved about what you were talking about with Amplify is the idea of modular lessons. So picking and choosing different lessons to customize for each student. And I'm just wondering, I know a lot of teachers do this already using open source content. I'm just wondering who you guys are working with as far as creating the content, because it's really important to be able to get trustworthy content.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, the good news is that there'll be lots of content out there, open source, proprietary, and so forth. Well, we've got a team, a company that when I started at News Corp, we acquired called Wireless Generation, which was known for the data and analytics. They have basically hired 3 kinds of people. They've hired very good curriculum people, both in the K-12 space and in the university space. We've partnered with, for example, great science programs and museums. So we're getting really world-class content. We're then taking that, marrying it with the technical and the creative people. And getting technical, creative, and curriculum people to work together is not such an easy job, but we're working on it. And what they're developing, and again, they develop it hand in glove with teachers and kids. And that's how we know it works. And lots of things that you think might work
don't really work. So one of the things we found with games, which is interesting, we have games that kids love, but the kids said, don't mandate the game. If you mandate it, it's no longer a game, it's homework, and we're not interested in it. So, you shake your head, but we didn't think about that. So those are the people. We have Jack Comfrey, who's working with us on mathematics. We have a group up here in Boston who's doing our English curriculum. And, it's the virtue of what we're doing. We can align it directly with Common Core. We don't have to replace it. But two things are critical. One, there will be a lot of content out there, and people will get a chance to see which is more impactful than others. And second of all, in the end, empowering the teacher to be able to do the kind of modularization. Because some lessons, they will think, even crowdsourced lessons, some people will find don't work for them, some will find work for them. Our Twitter man, do you have any question that you want to tweet about? Okay. Matt interviewed me before, and he gave me, this is what I call a great American. At the end, he didn't even know, but in New York, I am sort of known as the pizza guy. And after he interviewed me for his webcast, he gave me 2 slices of pizza, so we're solid.
Hi, my name is Jane, and I'm an undergraduate student at the college, and I'm interested in how the transition from print to digital media has affected the world, especially in the education realm. And I was actually talking to one Harvard professor this afternoon, and she has created a digital textbook that's accessible via iPad. And Harvard has provided iPads for all the students in her class to access the iPad and the digital textbook. And I'm wondering how you plan on financing all those technology, especially the tablets for the students, if you were to implement this program.
So we're making big investments, and school districts will have to decide what their budgetary priorities are. In the beginning, when we pilot this stuff, it's all piloted on us, but then eventually we do hope to sell these products, just like people sell a textbook and so on. But there will be open source textbooks, there's CK12 and others out there. And what we're trying to do is get people to write on our platform so that schools can pick and choose what content they want. But the model you're talking about seems to me so obvious. I mean, in this world, if kids had tablets, the idea that they would now have 5 or 6 of these chunked up textbooks and stuff, when they could have a digitized, much more interactive, much more visually stimulating experience. And if you go on iTunes, you see lots of books like that. There's a group I've been working with that has a book both on creative writing and one on the civil rights movement. And one on the civil rights movement, it's just mind-blowing because it's got all these interviews with great civil rights leaders and take you back through the lawsuit, Brown versus Board, Martin Luther King. And there's the kind of things, there's a million things like that that we can be doing. And I think it's just repositioning, repurposing. Now, if you're in the textbook business, you hope this happens a little more slowly. I have, a newspaper business that we have a News Corp where we want to sell, hard copies of newspapers. But the truth of the matter is we've got to be digitally wise and smart because lots of people are now moving into that space.
Hi, Joel. I'm Gino Larico, teaching principal at Quinebaug Middle College in rural eastern Connecticut. And my question, we target bright, capable students that are at risk of dropping out to come to our school. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are on why so many of our bright, capable young people are dropping out of high school. You said 30% or more. I just wanted to know your opinions and thoughts on that.
I think a couple of reasons. I don't think there's a simple reason. I think some of it is they're bored. They're not convinced that what's going on is terribly important. Some of it is, I used to run a thing called a Chancellor Student Advisory Committee. So I had 35 kids, and I would meet with them once a month. And what was a really candid exchange. And I'd ask them, well, why are people dropping out? And a lot of them would say they just don't find what's going on meaningful. They tell me that a lot of times their teachers were disengaged. And then the issues that Paul Tuff raises about resiliency and how we breed that into kids. I mean, that old marshmallow experiment of if you don't eat this marshmallow, we'll give you 2, is a pretty powerful experiment. And one of the things that KIPP schools and Paul Tuff have been focused on right now, is as these kids go through high school and the pressures on them, the need to earn a little income for their families and so forth, how they have the resilience necessary. So I think there's a wide variety of things. But in the end, if kids feel it's real, they feel they're learning, they get engaged, they're much more likely to stay. I've seen this time and time and time again. So it's a complicated problem, and I don't think there are any simple solutions. But the kind of thing you're doing, we created transfer schools in New York that had enormous social supports for kids, particularly kids who otherwise would be very high performing. And we had to address those needs. There's a group called Turnaround for Children we work with, Yale psychologists, psychiatrists doing phenomenal work.
Hi, thank you for being here tonight. My name's Anne Murray. I was a teacher in the Boston Public Schools until this year. I'm at the business school now. I'm wondering, as a district moves towards a choice model, how does it ensure that families, particularly those who have recently arrived to the country or don't speak English, have the information they need to make good choices?
So it's one of the things we did in New York, and it was controversial. We published a progress report on every school with lots and lots of information. Second thing that happened, whether these are newcomers or people indigenous to the community, people start creating fairs and things like that. So if you go to Harlem now, they have this annual fair, which it's a joy to behold, because the schools are all there, and they're telling people, the public schools, some private schools, the charter schools, and they're telling people about the different programs and stuff, and people become informed. The more website stuff you get out there on there, the more fairs, the more word of mouth. Is it perfect? No market is perfect, and knowledge is never perfect. But it seems to me, again, if you take the people in this audience and you say to them, they want to go out and find out more in order to find the right school for their kid when they're going to elementary or middle school. So if they are, why would you assume people in Harlem or people in Bedford-Stuyvesant in the South Bronx won't do that? And I found that they did, and what happened was we developed an increasingly informed community. So when you go to Harlem now, people will say to you, well, PSX, they're really strong at, and they've got the best fourth grade teacher. But you know, Success Academy, they're getting results that are like, and that's the way, it doesn't happen overnight, and it'll never be perfect information. But if you give people a choice, they tend to be more informed about than if you say to them, the only school is PS 11, and if you don't like it, tough. At that point, why should they learn anything? What's left for them? I mean, they can try to make it better, but they don't have a choice.
Hi, my name is Christina. I'm a teacher from DC.
Teacher what?
Teacher from DC.
From DC. What are you doing here?
I'm at the grad school now. The ed
Oh,
school.
I thought you came all the way from DC to hear me tonight. I was so flattered. I really was.
My question is about school choice and funding within the public school sector, and I include charter schools in that. I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts on how funding creates or doesn't create equal access.
It's a significant issue, and it's an uneven issue. But what I mean by that is, let me say what I think we ought to do, which is we ought to say on a per pupil basis, let's just say it costs $12,000 or $14,000 or $16,000 as a base rate per kid. And then you put on top of that if a kid has special needs or she has an English language learner or high poverty or whatever, and you create a weighted student formula so that basically we say, you know, Joel, he carries with him or she carries with her $16,000, $12,500. And then whichever of those schools you go to a charter school, you go to a traditional public school, you carry that money with you to the school. So at that point, it's not any different from a tuition-based model in the university world. And however you want to supplement it because of special needs or so forth, those are legitimate questions. Right now, unfortunately, we send money to the schools. And what I found when I started in New York, if you had 60 teachers in a school, basically everything that school was getting was based on the number of teachers and their average salary. So if a school had a whole bunch of young teachers where they could use more teachers, they didn't get any more teachers because they got to basically protect the number rather than the overall cohort. One of the things that bothers me a lot is the inequitable distribution of resources in education. And I at least would, if I were the federal government, I would try to figure out as many ways as possible to incentivize this weighted student formula model, but in a way that said the kids in the wealthier suburbs don't get a different per pupil stipend than the kids in the inner city. In places like DC and New York, we actually got to pretty decent levels of finance, but I would try to fight harder for equity.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Rahul. I'm a student at the Harvard Kennedy School. So with this really exciting and engaging way of engaging students, does that mean that it could supersede potentially the natural curiosity of learning? And as a result, then when you go to higher levels where you have to do 40, 50 pages of reading, for example, and it's not as exciting, does that mean people will give up easier because they're less engaged?
If it does, it's a failure. I mean, there's no question. But look, right now, if you see some of the work we're doing, I mean, you do have to read 40 and 50 pages. But the question is, how do you make it interesting and challenging? One of the things that bothers me enormously is the student-focused learning that we're doing, which makes it impossible for kids to read 50 and 60 pages. What do I mean by that? Take a complicated textbook, one that's a Common Core textbook of Frederick Douglass, which is a brilliant and very, very powerful story. When I would see kids learning Frederick Douglass in New York, the questions would almost be what it was like to be a slave, what was slavery about, how oppressive it was, have you been oppressed, et cetera, et cetera. So now we're talking about you and not Frederick Douglass. And so much of that kind of focus, I think, is what leads to the problem. Now, what we're trying to do, and I'm not saying it can work for every kid, is get kids excited, but they got to get engaged in the text and think about ways to give them text-dependent questions that make them, and you know, it's okay to gamify it if in fact they're reading the text and learning. One of the things we found, if a kid's going to write an essay, and you saw it up there, if you can give a kid comments on his or her first paragraph, it's like an over-the-shoulder teaching experience, that can go a long way in stimulating the kid's interest, his connectivity with the lesson, and so forth. But if what you say is right, if this is all just fun and games, if it's watching The Simpsons, it's going to be a tremendous, tremendous failure. And to me, it's got to be just the opposite. One of the things we're doing really poorly in K-12 is getting kids engaged in reading complicated texts. And if we don't stop that, I mean, and as a result, writing, our whole model is built on the fact that we can get kids to read twice as much and write twice as much. And you know, that's not a whole lot of time when it comes down to it.
Hi, my name is Anu, and I work for Mass Insight Education School Turnaround Group.
You're doing good stuff there.
Thanks.
Sure.
So when I saw kind of the demo video of what you could do on the tablet, one of my thoughts is that, like, if I were in high school and it was like 2 a.m. and I had access to anyone on the planet to answer my question about math, I might use that to cheat. Not me, you know, like one of my friends in my school. But so I guess the larger question that stems from that is, how do you prevent that kind of thing from happening with like this huge proliferation of resources and technology, and like Cliff Notes and Spark Notes that kids can access online? How do you prevent that? And I guess a more positive spin on that question is like, how do you make education technology so engaging, and I guess engaging students' critical thinking skills to the extent that they have to think about their answers and can't just kind of plagiarize from whatever's on
So let's take a step back before we take a step forward. Right now, if kids want to go online, and college kids do this, right? They can buy a term paper. I mean, at the best universities, people are known to buy term papers. I'm not sure we can put a stop. There'll be better and better software that can tell you whether it's somebody else's term paper and all this kind of rigmarole. You know, the SATs have gone through cheating, Harvard's gone through cheating, the public schools. So how we deal with that seems to me to be a serious problem across the board. But that can be made worse by this. What this kind of thing can do, and parents and teachers can control this. In the school system, one click, and if, let's say you want to give the kid an exam, one click and the kid can't go on the internet, can't email her friends, and really has got to basically do the work in front of her. Another click and the machine shuts down altogether, so they're not playing Angry Birds during the math lesson. So I think, you know, that's part of the customization. The second thing I think I would say on this is we all have an obligation to try to say to people that basically the only person you're cheating here is yourself. That doesn't mean it's going to work, but if we get to a point where people think that shortcuts and cheating and other people's term paper and plagiarism and copying what your friend says. I mean, a school in New York, Stuyvesant High School, one of the great high schools in America, we went through an enormous cheating scandal quite recently. If we get to that point, then we've really got to rethink our values as a society. I don't have an easy answer to it. But the technology can make it more secure, not less secure. But it can eliminate whatever impulse there is for people to cut corners. It's just not going to happen. Yes?
Hi, I'm Stephanie Kwok. I'm over at the business school, and like Jackie, I actually used to work at Parthenon and had the opportunity to work with former Deputy Chancellor John White on the Innovation Zone.
Right.
And I was hoping you could share some thoughts on how you think the approach and current progress of the innovation schools, how that can impact teaching and learning and technology in the classrooms, and also what you think about its potential to have the impact that some of the initiatives you talked about have had, like small schools and charter schools.
So first of all, thank you for what you did. We started an innovation zone as a way kind of to try to put a wedge in the system and develop new and innovative things like the School of One, and using technology in different ways, and small schools. The IBM school, we created a school with IBM that's a 9 to 14 school. Kid starts high school, gets 2 years of community college, gets an associate degree, and if you pass IBM certification, you become a technician right out of that school, hired by IBM, a whole new and different model. I would like to see school systems become innovation zones. I want to see it in the DNA of the system. But what I think the innovation zone did in New York is stimulate a lot of thinking and discussion, and it got our people thinking and discussing. So one of the great things for me was, I'll never forget it, I walked into a school one morning about 2 weeks before I left the system, and there was a bunch of kids in Harlem, and they were, by video, Skyped in was a great math teacher from Arizona. And it was like a 9 o'clock math class in our school, and out there was 6 in the morning, and she wanted to do this and make a few extra bucks. And I thought it was just terrific, because people were thinking differently about the challenge. So I think that stuff has a catalytic impact. The question is how you take it to scale. The other thing that people got to understand in K-12 is these things don't happen overnight. You know, you do your first year, I think about the first year of Amazon. And, you know, if we stopped after the first year, nobody would have ever predicted the transformative effect. Some of these things are going to take a few years, work through the kinks, work out the developments. But we've got to create a culture of innovation in K-12, and teachers have got to be at the vanguard of it.
Hi, Joe. My name is Camila Chavez Cortez, and I'm an artist, so everything I do...
I can tell from that beautiful blouse.
Thank you. Everything I do it with love and passion, and I believe that that's the main ingredient in teaching and also in learning. And one of the things I did while I was at MIT as a research fellow, and this was almost 20 years ago, I happened to go every single day to the school and videotape children because I was learning. I wanted to know about my own life as a multicultural child, what it was to be a multicultural children at that time, and what were the advantages of this being multicultural. And of course, something that the system never gives me credit for is I always learn to think with two heads, and then make the right decisions. And so I want to know how you're taking that, and that became a video methodology that I'll talk to you about. But I want to know how you're taking advantage of this multicultural fabric to be able to create negotiations that we really need, and self-esteem and understanding at a human level to get people to collaborate and progress.
You build this right into the work. I mean, we have people working in social networks. We have quests at the end of every body of knowledge so that kids are now taking knowledge and applying it. You create a culture. I mean, how did you do it? It's not unique. It's a question of what we build into the art form that we call education. And I do think it has dimensions of inspiration. I don't think it's only inspiration. Some of it's really tough and grueling work that you've got to master. But we can put these various pieces together. And I find when kids, for example, which I've seen happen now, when kids are getting excited about Frederick Douglass, Then they want to see videos about Frederick Douglass. They want to talk about him. They want to write to each other about him. I mean, Frederick Douglass lived an amazingly interesting life. If we can't make that interesting for kids, and the message that can come out of that is so powerful for kids, then there's something wrong with what we're doing, not with what they're doing.
Okay, another thing, this
All
is
right.
another comment. I just got one of those digital tablets and it broke. So I went to the digital tablet store where I paid $1,000 and I brought in my $300 backup video and photography camera from Canon. And I just flip it up on top and I told them, this is what we need, you know, this is quality, something that you can break on the floor, wouldn't break on the floor, and you can put in the water and play with it. And I hope that this is what you require for the school system.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm a public policy student at the Kennedy School. And my question really is related to the actors in the change that you're proposing, specifically for your first two pillars. So who needs to be involved in creating competition and choice and professionalizing teaching, and what role do they really have to play in order to sort of make the change that you're
So
we're talking
choice
about?
and competition, I think it's going to have to be driven largely by the states. It can be stimulated by the federal government, whether they want to do it at a district level, like we did, where you had a mayor who was willing to take this on. You're seeing more and more of it. If you watch what's going on in Tennessee, most of you know this world well enough, but you know, Kevin Huffman, who was an old TFA alum, went down there. He set up, just like in New Orleans, a recovery school district, and basically brought in Chris Barbick, who was doing some of the best work in Texas. And they're trying to drive these portfolio models. You see something similar in Detroit. I think that's where that's going to happen. In terms of who's going to professionalize teaching, I got to say, I think the ed schools have really got to come together and think about it. They think about it right from, and I'm not here to criticize any ed school, but think about it right from the admissions criteria, right from the knowledge that they think to make it a learned profession it would take, and to really have a Flexner report that starts to drive this. And forgive me for this, because it's the wrong form to say it, but it's just too much complacency in many ed schools. I'm not complaining about the Harvard School of Education, but it's too much complacency. No, thank you. But they have got to really say, you know, we owe it to the kids who come here. There's something wrong. People got to get their head around it. There's something wrong with a profession in which somewhere around 1/3 to 40% leave in the first 5 years. We're not doing this right. And so if I were, you know, in that world, that would, I think, stimulate. Second of all, we've got to figure out, and I think Randy Weingarten may be the right person to work with on this, we've got to figure out a way where the unions start to do what Amanda Ripley just said. Nobody wants to say there's no union here. Let's figure out how the union can move the Shanker second phase from one of collective bargaining and polarization to one of professionalization, which will definitely be a win-win. Is this going to be easy? I don't know. But competition actually will make it more like that. A lot of the schools that I admire most have really professionalized their teaching force. And I think there's an opportunity for us to move that discussion forward. Everybody's talking about Finland. I can see the dean is ready to tell me I'm going home. One more question, Dean? All right, we'll take one more question from this gentleman who's a friend of mine, and then we'll go to Matt. Go ahead.
So, me or Matt? Me?
You.
Good. Hi, Joel. I'm Josh, New York
Right.
City. And it's kind of a New York City-centric question, but I'm curious in terms of leadership as a whole. And you had just mentioned Randy Weingartner and came from New York City. And I'm kind of curious in terms of your look to the future. And as Mayor Bloomberg is in just about his 13th year as mayor, or his 11th year of mayor and going into his 12th, and his time is going to be up in New York, and what you see is the kind of the future for the New York City system, who might be your candidate of choice going forward, but also in particular in terms of potentially who that chancellor might be, and even more so when that person sits in his or her office for the first time, what would you tell that person that you wish had been told to you when you sat there for the
Well, it's
first
a great set of questions. If I knew you were going to ask that many, I might not have let you have the last question. But let me say it this way. I worry about New York going forward. I think a lot of the reforms are sufficiently embedded. There'll never come a time in a place like Harlem where people will say we're going to eliminate charter schools, take them out of the buildings and stuff like that. The parents won't allow that. But I think we're not remotely where we need to be in New York, or for that matter, other places. And I hope whoever the next, and I don't know yet who the full field is, so I don't want to get ahead of the politics, but I hope we have somebody who wants to drive the kind of things that I'm talking about. In terms of, sort of, the last question, what would I tell a new chancellor? First of all, to me, the kind of person I hope, and there's a whole host of them, I mean, someone like Chris or Kevin, John White, who worked for us in New York, is now running Louisiana, a guy like Jeff Canada. These are the kind of inspirational leaders that I think we're capable of. And the one thing I would tell anyone who took the job is what I said on the day I left. If I had one regret, I wasn't bold enough. We are still, no matter how willing we are to challenge the status quo, we are still not being bold enough. The ideas I put up here today, I don't mean small bore. I really mean a teaching profession that is a real profession. And anybody thinks that teachers are in a profession today is just flat out wrong. They're in a trade union, and that's costing them and costing us. And I think big change is what it's going to take across the board. And if anybody is fortunate enough to take this job on in the next administration, I would tell them when it's over, please be the first person I know who says, I was bolder than I should have been. That's what I hope for. All right, Matt, let's go.
So in addition to being your Boston pizza hookup, I also field questions from Twitter. There are 3. Feel free to answer whatever we have time for. Joel, who is doing gamification correctly, and how are they succeeding? Another one is there enough political will that exists to see that these tough changes that you're talking about can actually happen? And then someone talked about all this talk about tablets. Who is going to pay for them, and do you think that the publishers will eventually give them away? Because the price of tablets is
the third one, the price of tablets is going to come down. The third one's a business model. Eventually, whether school districts buy them. When I was in the chancellorship, we bought computers, lots of computers. I'm more worried about connectivity, frankly, and the equity issues for kids who don't have Wi-Fi at home. On this other two were one about
gamification,
and the political. Well, let's do game. So I don't know. Sal's doing some interesting things with gamification. I think people at Dreambox are. Other people. I don't see anything yet that sort of is aha. I think some of the games that we're developing with real-world games people and integrating them into an education space. We'll have that approach. But let me tell you, that takes serious investment. And again, games can only be a part of the solution. Somebody said before, this is not a game, it's an education. But we can use games in a way. So my wife, for example, we take the kids reading Anchored by Crane, and we take a very complex sentence from that and make the kid develop sentences. So I showed this game to my wife, and she went nuts. I mean, so she's playing it all the time. And that becomes very addictive. I mean, it's tough on our marriage, but it's very addictive. And the third is the one I want to end on, so thank you for asking it. So look, I think this is the most important. What do you mean when people say, do we have the political will? That means, do you have the political will? In America, more and more, we're at this point where the special interests seem so powerful that the common interest, the general interest, the things that we need to do together end up being so difficult. And so we throw our hands up. You know, Tom Brokaw wrote a book called The Greatest Generation. These are people who put their lives on their line for a better America, right? Died in a war. Why the hell aren't we prepared to put our spirit and our soul and our intellect on the line to create a better world? When I said to you before, none of you would send your kids to a school, to 3/4 of schools in New York. Nobody got up and said, that's just wrong, right? And I say, whose kids should go there? And they say, other people's kids. But those are the kids that need more than anyone. Those are the kids who have grown up with the hardest challenges, and we tolerate schools for them that we never tolerate for our own kids. And we look around America, and we see we got gun policies that no rational human being could possibly support. But because, no, you could, I mean, assault rifles And then you see what the hell goes on in Colorado, and then somebody said, well, if it weren't for the rifle, he'd do something else. Sure, but we don't have to give the kid a rifle just to test the theory here. I mean, we have the most irrational gun law. Why is that? Because small, powerful interest groups drive politicians whose principal interest is to get reelected in the next election. One of the things I loved about Bloomberg, every meeting, when things got really tough and people said, we got to change course, Mike, this is not politically viable. He'd say, why do we have to change course? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? I'll be a one-term mayor. He said, let me tell you something. My plan B is as good as anybody's plan A. If I'm a one-term mayor, that's just fine. That'll only happen. And this is Harvard, for crying out loud. You people should be out there. When I said we need a Flexner report, you should be pushing this. You're going to live in this future. Look at what's going on now in intergenerational transfer. We have a country now that wants to pay for all sorts of benefits for guys my age that don't need them, and taking the money from people that are younger. And for the first time, as I quoted before, we have a world in which more and more Americans don't believe their kids' lives will be better than their lives. What are we doing? And the answer to the political will question is, we are the political will. And if we don't assert ourselves and make it known that we have something at stake that's greater than our narrow short-term interests, then the America we knew is not going to be the America you live in. I always end my speeches with one thought, building on Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation. Question for our generation, my generation, is whether the American dream will become the American memory on our watch. Shame on us if it does. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.